Welcome to The World Awaits.
Travel tales to inspire your wanderlust. Welcome to The World Awaits. This episode is sponsored by Tourism Ireland. Discover what fills your heart with Ireland, be it the rich culture, the legendary Irish hospitality, the stunning scenery, ancient cities, or world-class food. Learn more at ireland.com.
Hi everyone, thanks for that, Belle. What's been happening in your world?
Hi, Kirsty. I caught up with some of Melbourne's family-friendly Moomba Festival activities on the weekend. Did you know, here you go, trivia tip, it has been running since 1955 on the long Labor Day long weekend, which we Victorians celebrate. It is celebrating the creation of the 8-hour working day, although I don't know that freelancers necessarily get to do that, do they?
Or anyone for that matter.
Maybe public servants or something. But I have to say, Fred Square was packed. There were 3 bands on stage. There were fireworks. There was a horrific ride called the slingshot, which catapults you through the air, whipping $40 out of your pocket for the pleasure. And we're actually talking about some more marvellous Melbourne history in our interview this week. So stay tuned for some awesome Melbournalia. Did you say that? Memorabilia? Melbournalia? Yeah.
I like it. So what was slingshot like? I'm guessing that you did it. Or did you watch Yasmin do it?
Listen, mate, if I did it, it would be whipping more than $40 out of my pocket. It'd be also taking my lunch. I did not do it. I really don't think so. Yeah, no, and I wasn't going to send my kid up there. Terrifying.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't do it either, to be fair. I do the old log flume. Do you know the log flume? That's a nice little ride.
I know the teacup as a tea and saucer.
Oh, funny. Talking about festivals, there are events the world over given this Monday, the 17th of March, and obviously every year for those on playback, it's St. Patrick's Day.
Oh, it's such a great day to be in Ireland. Every main street in town, every village is taken over with parades and music, everything and everybody turns green. And the whole point of it is it commemorates St. Patrick, who brought Christianity to the island of Ireland. Oh, I don't know, have you ever been to a St. Patrick's Day celebration, Kirsty?
Look, I have, but can I first of all ask you, you lived there. So what was the mood like?
Oh, it was just wild. It was a long weekend, and the whole of Dublin is just literally, as I was saying, every street is just blocked out. Everyone pours down into the streets, and the music is just overwhelming, and the party goes on all night. It actually doesn't stop. And that's just listening to great bands, and it's a massive party right across the island. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, amazing. They're so patriotic. It's incredible. I love it. And back in New Zealand, they also have lots of festivals to celebrate St. Patrick's Day and all things Irish. So in Auckland, actually, they have an Irish music and dance festival. And in Wellington, which is the capital, they hold a parade as well. And also in the South Island, they do. And in Invercargill, they have, because there's a big Irish community down there. And also in Christchurch, they actually have the Christchurch Irish Society. And so they have a whole series of events that they run. And because there's close to 20% of Kiwis have some sort of form of Irish ancestry. So there's a big connection.
So about 30% of Australians identify or claim to have some sort of Irish history. I'm one of them. Irish ancestry. I grew up in an Irish Catholic family, had the whole Irish nun thing going on at school. So the Derry Girls sitcom really does ring true for a lot of that. And so when I was a kid, it was always massive. We were singing Irish songs. All the kids were just splattered in shamrocks, going to the parade, wearing all green at learning the Pride of Erin waltz. I don't know if that's going to date me or kids learn that one even now. So when I lived in Dublin many years later, it was like going back to my childhood for me. It's just such a huge energy with the floats and the music. And in the Northern Ireland counties of Armagh and Down, where St. Patrick is actually buried, the festival lasts for 10 days.
Amazing. Ireland does love a good festival. And it has some of the best in the world, actually, too. There's also really amazing food festivals, such as the Galway International Oyster and Seafood Festival, which is held in September every year. And that's been running since 1954. Did you go to that when you were living there?
I have stuck like an oyster or two over in the West Coast. Yeah, it is phenomenal. Like long tables, people just mainlining oysters, having oyster eating competitions. I know, are you a fan of oysters? I had a feeling you're not really into them, but I reckon West Coast oysters might even turn you. Otherwise, there is nothing finer than the smoked salmon from the West, and it's the best I've ever eaten. Eat it with soda bread, local butter. It is so good.
Love smoked salmon, and yes, I will eat also scallops any day of the week, but not a huge fan of oysters. But hey, there are 3 new Michelin star restaurants in Ireland, so you might have more luck getting me there to eat than there. Who wouldn't eat an oyster in a Michelin star restaurant? So there's the Morrison Room at Carton House in County Kildare, Lingnam in County Galway, and the Grand Manor House Ballyfin Domain in County Laois. And that's a gorgeous Regency-style building, as well as there are also 3 more new gourmand listings in towns and villages around the island.
Yeah, the whole food scene has really taken off. And what I find really interesting about it in Ireland, it's not all highly polished. People are really attracted to that rustic authenticity that Ireland has. And it's so delicious. And look, staying on the festivals, Ireland really punches above its weight in literary circles too. The population of the whole island, I think we've got to remember, is just 7 million or so, but it had such a massive run of authors like Jonathan Swift, who wrote Gulliver's Travels, Bram Stoker, who, of course, is the author of Dracula, and even the Narnia Chronicles author C.S. Lewis. And of course, there's also William Butler Yeats, their most celebrated poet. So there's literary festivals coming out of their ears, including Bloomsday, which is held on the 16th of June each year. And that celebrates the author James Joyce and his most famous work, Ulysses. And I used to live close to the Martello Tower in Sandy Cove in South County Dublin, which is where James Joyce had lived and worked in that tower. And I had friends who would go all out for Bloomsday in full costume, boater hats, reading from his plays in the streets. And it's just marvellous. But I think also this year is really interesting for Ireland because I think possibly its most famous literary son, Oscar Wilde, he has an anniversary coming up as well. So if there's one line that you have to remember from Oscar Wilde, that is where he says, there's only one thing in life worth being talked about, and that's not being talked about.
Yeah, and so this year is 125 years since Wilde died, penniless in a hotel in Paris. And more happily, he's celebrating a new festival called In Our Dreams, which is in October, but otherwise you can visit his house in Dublin year round.
And I was in Ireland a couple of years ago to cover the Puka Festival. This was a fascinating new festival. It's a modern interpretation of Samhain, which is that pagan festival that marks the division between light and dark when the earth spins into the gloom of winter. It's morphed into becoming what we know now as Halloween. And I have to say that Samhain is a lot darker and a lot more spiritual than the whole candy and pumpkin thing that we now endure. So if you are in Ireland at the end of October, the 3-day Puka Festival is held around County Meath, just north of Dublin. It's got a fabulous music and comedy lineup each year. It's got circus, storytelling, some really great light installations thrown across the castles in this area. And the best part for me was learning about the characters and their connection to the spirit world, because it's really about the time when our world and the world of the afterlife interconnect. And it's all about darkness and then bringing the light back in and sending those spirits back into the underworld. Totally spooky. Look, you're a bit of a gore fan. You would love that kind of thing.
Why? Because I love crime fiction. I tell you what, there are so many festivals in Ireland, and they're really great ones and so many reasons to go because they're all just so distinct. And I just love the way they really get into it. Aside from all of these incredible festivals, I love a good walk. And although it is such a tiny place compared to Australia, it has really incredible nature. And it was really interesting to learn about St. Patrick's Way, which is a 132-kilometre trail which links Armagh and Downpatrick. And you can do it over 6 to 10 days as a regular walk, or you can do it as a pilgrimage.
Yeah, look, there's some really atmospheric scenery on this walk, which links up some of the waymarked ways around Ireland, including the Way and the Carlingford. And I can say, Kirsty, this is spectacular hiking country. It's not got that sort of giant snow-capped mountain sort of thing. A lot of it is quite flat, but it gives you that time just to walk and think through, which is the whole point of a pilgrimage, isn't it? Just to go into your mind and really appreciate what you're walking through. But I camped along this trail, and I remember waking up one morning early to watch seals playing at the foreshore. It's absolutely unforgettable scenery.
Yeah, so beautiful. And yet another reason why you need to get to Ireland. So if you have got Ireland on your travel radar, we'll put links to these celebrations and everything we've talked about in the show notes. And make sure that you visit ireland.com for more Irish inspiration.
This week, my guest is the author Dale Campisi, who recently released his 3rd book about Melbourne. we're going to be chatting about, we've got some fabulous trivia for you about Melbourne, and we have also got a giveaway for Dale's book. So take a listen. Hi, Dale. Welcome to the World Awaits. It's so lovely to have you on the podcast.
So great to be here.
Now, look, you're an author, you're a lover of Melbourne, and your latest book combines those two things. It is called Naarm, Melbourne Neighbourhoods, Stories, Walks, Miscellany. And this is actually your third book about Melbourne. What is it about the city that has got you so enchanted?
It is a city that is full of stories. And the thing I really love about it is that it wears its stories and very much its heart on its sleeves. It's a really terrific city to get to know if you take the time to look. And absolutely, it really rewards looking up.
Oh, really? Okay. So how long have you lived in the city? Is it under your skin? Did you grow up here? What's your story with Melbourne?
Absolutely under my skin. I think one thing I often say when I'm out on tour with guests is that, like many Melbournians, I'm an immigrant to this city. I grew up in country Victoria. I used to catch the V-Line train and then later the bus down to Melbourne, and it was always very much in my future that I'd move there, of course, to go to university, where I studied Australian history. And I got some really early insights into Melbourne and its place in the world. Throughout the 19th century, it became one of the richest cities in the world, thanks to the gold rush. And it's a boom and bust city. It has boomed and it is incredible off the back of a boom. And then a bust creates these unique opportunities for the city to reinvent itself. And all of the layers of that history is visible in the built fabric that remains today.
I think that's what makes it so interesting. Now, about the book, it's described part guidebook, part history primer, and telling the stories of the people and locations in the city. I love that it's got maps with these walking routes in them, such as that 3-kilometre walk that you've got that starts on Queensbridge and then it goes up to the Royal Exhibition building in the city. But it's not just about the CBD. I think that's the really important point in it. So you're right across the whole city. Hard questions first. What's your favourite neighbourhood in town?
Oh, gee, that is a really tough question. Just to track back to your, certainly the book is called Naarm, Melbourne Neighbourhoods. And I was really struck by a comment that I found. This is a 19th century diarist talking about arriving in the city at night. So they're coming into the bay and they see that the city is ringed with light, and they make the comment that Melbourne is a city of villages, because it absolutely is. And obviously a lot of that is built around railway as well, as the railways progressed and our famous radial network. Communities build up around those train stations. And in the old days, it's butcher, baker, candlestick maker. The post office really anchors our neighbourhoods. And then an interesting thing that has happened, certainly post-COVID, one of the things that we can take out of the disruption of the pandemic has been how communities have really backed in neighbourhoods. Of course, Melburnians endured some of the toughest lockdowns, and we had a 5-kilometre radius. And so it became really important that there's a good cafe, there's a good restaurant, there's a good bar, there's the dog park, all within those areas. And these are places that communities can come together and galvanise a place and create really robust neighbourhoods. But it's not all about the CBD. The city of Melbourne and its personality is much bigger than that. In terms of my favourite place, very tough question. I would say right now I'm really enjoying Hardware Lane's renaissance. Hardware Lane was one of Melbourne's original al fresco dining precincts, and it is pumping again. It's so exciting to see all the diners out there again, and in that broader precinct as well. So historically a hardware district, but now of course very much a dining district. You can't go wrong in that area. So I really love going and exploring that and sharing that with people as well. Swanston Street, no one ever really talks about Swanston Street in the city, but again, one of our most important thoroughfares. It tells quite a lot about the city's history. And I really love that connection from the Shrine of Remembrance. You get a 3-kilometre view north, straight up the guts of Swanston Street. Sorry, not north, but a view. Yes, you get a view north, straight up Swanston Street, and that vista is terminated by the Barrack Tower, where you get that really terrific visage of the Aboriginal elder.
Yeah, it's quite a structured city. I've got to say, I do love Hardware Lane. I'm a massive fan of it. And I think one of the first times I went out back into the city after COVID was also at the time that I think Peter Dutton had said that we were all too scared to go to restaurants because of African gangs. I was standing in Hardware Lane, could not get a seat. You're like but people were fighting over a chair at Kirk's Wine Bar. It was like it was a blood sport on it, and I love that for it. So I think I agree with you on that one. What do you think? Okay, first, there's so much trivia packed in here. Can I just ask, did we narrowly miss being called Batmania, or is that just an urban myth that I really love because of one of the sort of founding fathers?
No, definitely. We definitely narrowly missed that one. There's been some names as places. So Melbourne's founding or its establishment, certainly as a European city. I often refer to Melbourne as a European city and remind people that Melbourne is not in Europe, even though we like to think we have a certain Europeanness about us. And that, of course, in certainly the post-war migration, the amount of European cultures that migrated here. It started out, ultimately, Melbourne, remember, is established as an illegal commercial settlement from Tasmania. The pastoralists taking over the lands there looked across the strait and could see the potential around the bay and its hinterland, of course. And so we get this illegal settlement emerge. It takes a few names. Of course, John Batman is one of the early colonists to arrive here, along with John Pascoe Fawkner as well. So yeah, certainly named for him. But then ultimately Melbourne is named for, its European name Melbourne is named for a colonial official from the time, Lord Melbourne. But of course, Naarm is its traditional name, and we're increasingly seeing that. And it's really terrific to see that. Naarm, of course, is many Aboriginal place names. They're descriptive references. They're really useful place names. And Naarm is a reference to the bay, of course. As a site of settlement too, Naarm, Melbourne is located on the Yarra River, usefully, for fresh water, and that's what attracts all people to areas, and you'll see that in common with cities around the world. There used to be a falls about where Queen's Bridge is in the city, and that was a useful foot crossing for the traditional custodians of the area, the Wurundjeri and the 5 tribes of the Kulin Nation.
That's absolutely fascinating. I'd never actually thought of it as the usefulness of names as descriptive names, as in know the place where platypus are or a great place to cross a river. What impact did the European colonisation of the land have on the Kulin Nation?
Absolutely devastating, particularly for the Bunurong peoples, whose traditional lands extend roughly from the Yarra River right through to Wilson's Prom. But certainly for all of them, the population was decimated. The dispossession that occurred, the massacres that occurred. And I do talk about this extensively because contemporary Melbourne ultimately is built upon, there's a very long history, of course. The Wurundjeri and the Bunurong, as I mentioned, all of the Kulin nations have been using this area for tens of thousands of years.
Sure.
They were gathering here. And of course, the Europeans arriving could see that this is a good place to be for a reason. Yeah, the impact, it's not just the impact of people, but certainly the impact of sheep on the land as well. So sheep and cattle coming destroyed a really central crop for the traditional custodians of the area, what's called murnong. So it's a tuber vegetable. So their heavy hooves on the soil, of course, just wiped out those crops. So it made it really difficult for them to continue cultivating the land as well. So a devastating impact that's obviously endured for 200 years. And it's a really terrific thing to see that Melbourne is increasingly embracing its First Nations cultures here. That's the traditional owners, as well as the many First Peoples that have been dispossessed, who have been part of the stolen generations as well, who have ended up in Melbourne. So we have really strong First Nations communities here who I'm so grateful that they share their culture with us and that we can work together for reconciliation.
And you can read about that in the book. Where do you go in the city to find that? Where are those stories told apart from in your fabulous little books?
Yeah, of course, Aboriginal histories are best told by Aboriginal people for sure. Really terrific site to visit is the Koori Heritage Trust at Federation Square. From there, there's a local tour. They'll take you down to the Burrarung Marm, so right on the banks of Burrarung, the Yarra River. And there's lots of really useful interpretations. So there's some artwork down there and they'll bring them to life, those artworks, and give you some insights into the cultural history. Remembering that it's not just about, this is how Aboriginal people used to live on the land. It's how they still live on the land today. And that includes the tougher stories about the stolen generations and about how racism persists and our unconscious bias exists as well. It's important to be part of that conversation. It can be a challenging conversation, but challenging conversations will be rewarded.
Yeah, and I guess they're the ones that make us grow. It's a pretty brutal start for the European history of Melbourne. When I was reading the book, I was surprised to know that one of the beaches closest to me at Williamstown had prison hulks moored off there. I thought we left them behind back in England. That's why everybody came out here, because they were sick of living in the hulks. But then they came here and it was like, hey, here's your accommodation. That's just very fair, did it? That's amazing.
Terrible circumstances there at the prison hulk. Certainly that area, Williamstown, is a fascinating place to visit. I'm so fortunate to have lived in many different places right across the city, and then every time friends going away, I'm quite happy to offer to house sit because it gives me an opportunity to live like a local in an area.
Yeah.
But out in Williamstown, there's a really terrific maritime heritage that extends all the way back to that brutal time of where we incarcerated people for quite trivial reasons and in very harsh conditions, which seems like very hard work to maintain. And imagine being those overseers looking after them. Terrible work.
Yeah, and now it's just an absolutely gorgeous suburb facing onto the water, which is just beautiful. So what I liked in the book too is that you brought in things like you have lists, love a good list. One of my favorites was a list of movies that applied to Melbourne, starting with the world's first feature-length movie, which was shot in Australia, the story of the Kelly Gang, which was 1906, which always blows my mind when I read that, right up to The Castle and Romper Stomper in 1992, which of course was our Russell Crowe's breakthrough movie in 92, filmed up in Broadmeadows in the top of the city. Also brutal. So you can't just say that we left our brutal history behind with the prison hulks in the 1800s in Williamstown, because that movie, oh my goodness, readers, listeners rather, if you go out and watch Romper Stomper, you might not want to come to Melbourne for it. But that really does give you that breadth of the Melbourne.
We have a really fascinating film culture, and obviously an historic one, beginning with one of the oldest films. And we've only got about 17 seconds of that remaining, inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage Register for its early. But interesting, it's the story of the Kelly Gang. It's a story that persists today. And it tells a really important story about how that division between the English and the Irish, and was Ned Kelly a criminal or was he a folk hero? I think there's a good argument for him sitting on both sides of the fence there. The film history stuff, probably my favourite Melbourne film is called Malcolm. It's Colin Friel's mid-80s. He's an inventor. The sequence, the film opens with he's a tram driver as well, and he goes off on his own little journeys around the city in his custom-built tram. And then, of course, he was looking for a flatmate, and a robber moves in, and ultimately he ends up helping him with a series of crazy inventions. But you get this really terrific footage of the city, which is really great to see from a film like Alvin Purple, controversial sex farce from the 1970s, but the background footage in that, you get a sense of the sensibility of the city at the time. You get to see that really terrific background footage, and then it changes again in the 1980s in a film like Malcolm, and then again by the 1990s, more of the city and really terrific working dog production, so clever at the castle. And again, you see the footage of the city and what it's looking like in the 1990s. Music and film clips does a really terrific job of showing how the city has evolved over time as well.
I was about to say movie clips film clips are a really great way of doing that, because if you had to put it into a nutshell, the most iconic song to have been videoed in Melbourne, where would you put it?
Oh, wow. Yeah. So look, there's a couple I'll immediately reference. AC/DC, The Long Way to the Top, filmed on the back of a flatbed truck traveling down Swanston Street. Kylie Minogue walking along the river and shot atop the Hyatt in the city. And also the living ends all torn down, which is all about the development of the city that really ramps up at the end of the 1990s. And that is a really fast song, and the fast beat is all about the pace of development. Some really terrific footage in that clip as well.
Sensational. So we've actually got a couple of copies of the book to give away to listeners, and we'll give you all the details in the show notes and on socials and stuff like that afterwards. But it is also beautifully designed as well. You've got all of these breakouts in there. So actually things like best pubs, or the oldest pubs as well, going back to that history, and the 6 o'clock swill that persisted through, I think, God, when did it end in Melbourne? Like that I had to drink everything until 6 o'clock, and that's when it was closing. So everybody just double parked all of their beers and mainlined them until 6, and then went outside and and vomited on the tile, which is why our pubs are tiled up to a certain height, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
When did the 6 o'clock swill end in Melbourne?
Yeah, so the 6 o'clock swill ended in 1966. So it began in 1916. So we had 50 years of it. So it begins as one of those there'd been a temperance movement, and that was a global phenomenon right through the 19th century. Women were really active in the temperance movement, of course, because they bore the brunt of binge drinking and alcoholism at home. But yeah, it comes in, of course, during wartime, and then it continues. And that really affects the city's sensibility. Melbourne is perceived to be this really dour place. Think of how different that is. And that, of course, shapes the experience of people coming here. You can't go out and drink and have a good time. You do that in a really moderated way, or you drink at home. Finally, in 1966, that begins to change. And then, of course, for Melbourne, it's actually liquor licensing that has an impact in terms of the emergence of the city as a foodie city. That's largely due to Press Code 3000 that the City of Melbourne drove at the end of the 1990s to increase residential and event attendance in the city by really encouraging small bars, which is what the city has become famous for. And that's led to the rejuvenation of the laneways and so much of what we love about the city today.
And it's amazing, though, then that type of history, there's something like the 6 o'clock swill and then the small bars, that's still imprinted on the architecture in the city today, isn't it? Because you see the way that the bars were designed, having the saloons out the back, but then the style of the bars too, having that particular tiling. You know, I'm a big ceramic tile fan. So yeah, when you see that and you see that design in the city, right across the road from Flinders Street, you've got Young and Jackson's there, which is still there. I was in it the other day showing a friend Chloe, which is one of our most famous. Everybody loves to sit around drinking in front of a nude woman. My favorite pastime. The other question is, because you actually lead guided tours around Melbourne with hidden secrets, which I love, because now I get to ask you all of those questions of urban myth. Was Melbourne's Flinders Street Station supposed to be in Mumbai? Did they actually mix the plans up?
Yeah, look, that's another one of those great myths. I think people just think it was designed by railways employees who lived in Melbourne. It was designed for Melbourne. The site of Flinders Street is such an interesting place, and there have been whole books devoted just to that railway station. We get, of course, Melbourne being one of the biggest or richest cities in the world as a result of the gold rush. The first train line is built between Flinders Street is the site of what was called the Melbourne Terminus, which connected to Port Melbourne to bring people straight from the boats into the city. The famous indicator clock, a famous Melbourne phrase, meet me under the clocks. Those clocks are still there. They actually date to the original station. They're from 1868. And they were, when the new station was opened in 1910s, the clocks were installed as well because they were already a part of the city. And originally, that was someone's job to use a crook and change the dial to indicate when the next train for each line would come in. Interestingly, fun fact, of course, a new train station is built, the Flinders Street Station that we know and love today. So that, of course, required the demolition of the old one. The original canopies from a couple of the platforms of the old station are actually, they demolished them and transported them, and they became the canopies, which are still there today at Hawthorn train station. So you can see a really old piece of Melbourne in Hawthorn.
Oh, I love it. I was going to ask you what your favorite piece of trivia was on your explorations. That is a pretty good one.
We're really fortunate to have some architects in Melbourne who tell stories in their work. So to take Eureka Tower, for instance, we talk about it being 297 meters tall, one of the largest residential towers in Australia. Yeah, the story doesn't end there, though. The gold square at the top, and its name, of course, Eureka, refers to the Eureka Rebellion that happened on the back of the discovery of gold. And the Eureka Rebellion, which occurred up at Ballarat, was about the miners working on the goldfields up there didn't have rights to vote, because then you needed to own property. This was men needed to own property in order to vote. Ultimately, it led to the introduction of universal male suffrage. So all males could vote by 1856. It'd be another 50 years before women could get the vote. But that story is, in many ways embedded in Eureka Tower. The red stripe that you see across the gold, that refers to the blood spilled on the gold fields. Similarly, that's a Nation Senator Katsulides building. Next door to that, Australia 108, 322 meters tall, even bigger. And it's got the star around its neck, so reference to the Federation of the Australian Colonies, the 8-pointed star off the back of that, which is, really terrific. And I can, take guests out on tour, point to these things and say, oh, this is this story, this is this story. They're all there. We just need to take the time to look and reflect and ask questions.
And it's amazing that it's not just, we're not looking at the old buildings as well. I mean, these are the buildings that are built in the last few years as well. That's amazing.
Yeah. And, that's because Melbourne is a city of stories. We've got lots of stories to tell, and, it's so great to have them there.
Do you know, one of the questions I didn't ask you was, who does it better, Melbourne or Sydney?
Yeah, good question. Not one that I really entertain, though, I've got to say. I love Sydney.
Yeah.
It's so different to Melbourne.
Mm.
It'll always be the oldest city. It'll always have, it sits on a beautiful harbour. It has beautiful architecture. Melbourne has beautiful architecture. It has a beautiful bay. Let's not compare them. The rivalry, though, is rooted in, goes all the way back to the 1840s and what I referenced at the beginning about Melbourne was established first as an illegal commercial settlement, and certainly it was justified as a commercial settlement. So Sydney didn't want to put a lot of money, or the powers who were based in Sydney didn't want to put a lot of money into Melbourne. If it was going to survive, it would make its own money because that was its purpose. There's a really great quote. The Governor Richard Burke in the 1840s said, "There will be no public squares in Melbourne. They only encourage democracy." See, that's amazing, but that's why Melbourne doesn't have or didn't get a city square until 1980. And, as a people, we'd gone that long without a city square. We hadn't really established how we would use one. Finally, we get Federation Square in the early 2000s. And you can see how 10 million people visit Federation Square every year. So there's obviously a need for one.
Can I ask you now, the last question that we ask all of our guests is, what is your most bizarre travel experience? Doesn't have to be in Melbourne. Go anywhere in the world. Hit me.
Yeah, so I'd like to go to Morocco.
Yeah.
I love my time in Morocco. I had watched a lot of old movies as a kid, Sinbad the Sailor, that kind of style. So Morocco had always loomed large. So it was obviously high on my travel bucket list. I loved it so much. My partner and I were traveling there, and we were on the train on the way back up to Tangier to get back onto the continent and head back to London ultimately to come home. We thought, we've just got to stay a bit longer. Let's just jump off the train, which we jumped off the train in the middle of the night at a little place called Asila, and then got off the train and then just went, it's dark. And what are we going to do now? Fortunately, we met a man named Abdul in his jalaba on the train platform. He said, come back and stay at my place. And ultimately he became our tour guide for the next few days. So we stayed with his family. We visited his mother, who lived in a Casbah with no electricity in the hills outside the town. Terrific experience there. So it was one of those kind of, ultimately I look back and go, that was a bit silly, taking our life into our own hands. But when you're young, go for it, I say. Obviously be safe, but it gave us some insight into the way in which local people live. And that's something that I always search for in the places that I visit, is to understand what locals love about them.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I love Melbourne. You love Melbourne. I love your book about Melbourne. The book is called Naarm, Melbourne Neighbourhoods, Stories, Walks, Miscellany. Dale also is a tour guide with hidden secrets and can take you on food and wine degustation tours, which would be phenomenal. I'm going to book in on one of those. And thank you so much for being our guest today on The World Awaits.
Thanks so much for having me.
That was author Dale Campisi on a deep dive into Melbourne's history with Belle. And you can win a copy of his new book, Naarm, Melbourne Neighbourhoods, by dropping us a line at hello@theworldawaits.au, or keep an eye on our Instagram or Facebook pages to enter the competition. And you can find out more about Dale's work on his website, thegentaustralia.com.
This episode is sponsored by Tourism Ireland. Discover what fills your heart with Ireland, be it the rich culture, the legendary Irish hospitality, the stunning scenery, ancient cities, or world-class food. Learn more at ireland.com. Our tip this week is the museum exhibits you need to see right now. So I dropped into the Australian Museum in Sydney to see its current blockbuster exhibition, Machu Picchu and the Golden Empires of Peru, which is showing until the 11th of May. Once again, the museum has pulled off a fabulous, entertaining exhibition. I visited the Egyptian exhibition there last year, which was about the pharaoh Ramses, which even had his sarcophagus in it. This time, the gold is about Inca gold. And for me, the highlight is, again, the virtual reality experience where you strap into this sort of golden egg seat with a headset and earphones on, and you literally go flying around Machu Picchu. If you had some issues about, because it's like you're sitting in an armchair and flying down the side of a mountain, it does take a little bit of getting used to, because you're diving down into the valleys and up into the mountain peaks as you explore the lost city of the Incas. It is so worth the visit.
Yeah, wow, that sounds really cool. Running until the 21st of April at Melbourne's National Gallery of Victoria is an exhibition called Kusama, which is by Yayoi Kusama. Most people recognise her yellow pumpkin sculpture on a pier in Naarm. So I've been really fortunate to see this, and it's now synonymous with Japan's art island of Naarm. And I took a photo sitting in front of it, and it was sadly a bit of an overcast day, but it's still really striking. Like, you just, in particular, probably more so on an overcast day, because when we turned up, there's just this glowing yellow pumpkin sitting at the end of the pier under this moody sky. It was quite remarkable. And that exhibition in Melbourne has got artwork that she created during her childhood, and also includes her experimental years in post-war Japan, to her contributions to New York's avant-garde scene in the 1960s, and right through to her return to Japan in 1973.
Amazing. And the NGV's focus for the winter masterpiece this year has been announced. It will be a French Impressionist exhibition, which starts on the 6th of June. If you go to Canberra, running until the end of April, is a major retrospective on Anne Dangar, which is one of the very few Australians to form part of the European avant-garde movement in the 20th century. Anne died in the 1950s, and she was said to be the only artist to meaningfully contribute to Cubism in her adopted home of France, which I had no idea about. So they are bringing together ceramics, paintings, her works on paper and archival material, and the exhibition also explores her life and practice.
And we will put a link to all of those in the show notes. And if you are listening on playback, there's sure to be some other great new exhibitions on for you to check out. If you'd like to help support our production costs, you can buy us a coffee at coffee.com/theworldawaits, so we can continue to bring you inspirational travel interviews with the world's best. Next week, I'm chatting to Keith Sproul, the Executive Director of Abercrombie and Kent Philanthropy, who has travelled to more than 140 countries. We talk about some of the 55 projects in 24 countries that he oversees, including one where they train women across Africa and the Middle East to run bike shops so they can financially support their families. We also touch on several other projects you can get involved in, and he explains why you should.
That sounds amazing. I can't wait to hear that one. So if you're enjoying the show, please give us a rating and a review and let us know on Apple Podcasts. Click onto our profile, scroll down to the bottom and to ratings and reviews. And if you're listening on Spotify, go to our main page, click the 3 dots underneath our photo, or, hey, drop us a line at hello@theworldawaits.au. We love nothing more than hearing from listeners.
That's a wrap for The World Awaits this week. Click to subscribe anywhere you listen to your favourite pods.
Thanks for listening. See you next week.